The world of trading card games is a ruthless one. Many hundreds have met their fate and died. However, the remains they leave behind never truly vanish from this world. Welcome to Cards from the Abyss!
Hey everybody, this is Kodak here, and welcome back to Cards from the Abyss. Today we're actually taking a look at a viewer-submitted entry, and what better way to get a bit more into the spooky theme of October than to play a game with Ghost in its name. This is the Yuyu Hakusho Ghost Files trading card game. This is actually a sealed starter deck I've got here, so I don't know if I should open it or not, but you know, card games are made to be played, so we'll be taking a look at this. Although, thankfully, I actually through the use of movie magic, have a few cards already. A few cards that I've picked up here and there over the years. Anyway, Yu Yu Hakusho, it's another game from the big surge of anime licenses in the same vein as a lot of the other games that are out there. And this is by Score Entertainment. Now, back in the day, in the early 2000s, there were basically three companies that were fighting over the all the anime card games out there, unless it was a case of the company from Japan bringing their game over, in the case of like Naruto, or in the case of the SD Gundam card game, oh my god. But yeah, generally what you would have to deal with are Score, Upper Deck, or Decipher. Decipher was clearly the underdog in this situation. I mean, it thought it would be a good idea to try to make a card game about cheap plastic battling tops. I mean, these kinds of card games are designed to allow you to simulate what happens in the anime, but the thing about Beyblades is you can simulate the anime by just buying the tops for less than the cards. Upper Deck kind of coasted on Yu-Gi-Oh! For a while, but Score is known mostly for their Dragon Ball card game. The original Dragon Ball Z card game was developed by Score Entertainment and briefly brought back by Panini, although Panini lost the license when Bandai decided to launch the game for themselves. But Score, they had some other games as well. They had the Yu Yu Hakusho card game. They also made the underrated and, in my opinion, actually really good Bleach card game. I like this game because you're pretty much always guaranteed to have something good happen on your turn with how much card and resource flow goes into it. And they also made the Inuyasha card game, which was the Bleach game, only worse. None of the cool character abilities or resource management in that game. But anyway, today we're taking a look at Yu Yu Hakusho, and Yu Yu Hakusho has a bit of a sordid history as far as card games are concerned, because it came out, it was actually pretty popular, but then it didn't really crash and burn as much as it imploded in midair. Not only did the game suffer from massive and sharp and immediate power creep, this game only got like, I think 6 sets if you include the starter decks. So that's like maybe a year and a half. It suffered massive power creep that allowed degenerate strategies like really easily performed OTKs and FTKs, which you'd think, which for this game, for a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or like Magic, well, Magic, an FTK in Magic is like, you know, a total meme strategy, but like a first turn kill in Yu-Gi-Oh! Seems kind of plausible with the limitations. How to get a first turn kill in Yu Yu Hakusho, I'm not really able to wrap my head around, because you'll see how the game plays pretty quickly here. But the other sort of thing was, apparently one of the game's lead designers was caught cheating at a high-profile event for this game, although that accusation was not sourced on Wikipedia, so I'd say take that with a grain of salt. But anyway, let's get into the discussion here, and then we'll take a look at the starter deck. There is at least one thing I want to say about the starter deck, but the idea is that the goal is you're going for it's a tournament, like Yu Yu Hakusho is most famous for its tournament. Yu Yu Hakusho, the story, it's about this guy named Yusuke Urameshi. What happens is he's like a total jerkwad. So when he dies performing a selfless action to save somebody else's life, the underworld is like, you know, we didn't think you'd actually do that, so we have no place to put you. So he floats in limbo for a while, but then he comes back to life and is able to shoot finger guns, and then he fights Big Muscle Man. Yeah, Yu Yu Hakusho is kind of a blur to me, so I'm maybe not the expert to ask about the show. So, although I remember how this guy sounded, Ura-Meh-Shi. Although this is Yu-Rah-Meh-Shi, this is Kuabara, and of course Hiei, and, well, I don't know it's Hiei because you can see his name here. I can't remember this guy, but I think he had like a flower motif. But yeah, it was kind of a blur. Its most famous stuff is its tournament arcs. Like, I remember the Togaro arc was all about tournaments, so of course the game itself plays out like a tournament. What you do is you have a lineup of, you take 4 characters out of your deck and create a lineup of characters, and your characters fight with your opponent to try to win a best of 5, basically. You also want to have more character cards in your deck to get out a 5th member in case it goes 2 and 2. Taking a better look here, what happens is each character has an attack stat, a defense stat, and a team icon. I don't know if that's Team Yu-Rah-Meh-Shi or not. I know Hiei is featured on the front with all the characters here. But what happens is, at the end of your turn, you discard a number of cards from your hand to perform an attack that one of these characters can do and attempt to hit over the defense of your opponent. If you manage to match their defense, you inflict 1 point of damage. If you beat their defense by double, you inflict 2 points of damage. You can only inflict 2 points of damage per turn. That is your maximum. If you don't hit over your opponent's defense, you can discard 2 cards from your hand in order to inflict the damage. So the goal is to inflict 4 damage total to your opponent, and the first player to inflict 4 damage to their opponent wins that round, and they slide over and we continue on to the next round with a new pair of characters. Now, it's not just, you know, a straight-up war where these characters have their abilities that go on each other. There are also things that can manipulate the battlefield. You have items which can offer stat increases, like Combat Knives offers a plus 1,000 attack bonus to Hiei, so I'd like slide it under there like that, I guess. There are also some special items that have special abilities, so the idea is you discard this card and pay a spirit energy. Some cards have a spirit energy cost, and you get 2 spirit energy at the start of your turn to spend on these sorts of abilities. So this guy can be discarded to inflict minus 1,500 defense on your opponent, which can be enough to either hit over or to hit for 2. You also have techniques. Now what these do is they allow you to perform alternative moves on your turn. So while Hiei has a power 4,000 attack that costs 2, if I gave him the card Shards of Winter, attach this to him, he'd have a 4,000 attack that he can do for just 1. So while it loses Hiei's additional milling effect, it does allow me to attack for the same power for less. And then finally there are the event cards, which are your basic one-shot spells, basic abilities that you play and are done with. Now, I do see some character cards, some images of characters on here. I don't know if that means you can only use those abilities if that character is in play. I'm not entirely familiar with this mechanic. I think you had to have this character for things like in Dragon Ball, but considering how this game operates, where you have to have, where most of your characters spend the game face down, it's not entirely, I'm not entirely sure how that would necessarily go. So it's just a best of 3 tournament. It sounds pretty simple. It sounds almost too simple. So simple that it's actually kind of deceptive, because what happens is there is a thing called a team bonus, where if you have characters of all the same, if you have at least 3 characters from the same team, you get a kind of bonus. But the thing is, those bonuses aren't on the card anywhere. You actually have to go and look up a list for what the team bonus is. Let's see, do I have a card that mentions team bonuses? Yeah, there we go. If you have the Saint Beast's team bonus, it says so right here, but it doesn't list those bonuses anywhere on the field. So that's an added level of complication, an added level of things you have to look up in order to find out, and that sounds like a big pain in the butt. That doesn't seem like good game design there. So you actually draw 2 cards at the start of your turn. So score tends to be the games that give you multiple draws on your turn in order to keep the momentum moving. And score was also kind of famous for power creep, although power creep in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. If your game is kind of a slog, everything's slow, everything feels really weak, a bit of power creep to bring things up so that games actually have a nice flow to them can be beneficial. Like Magic the Gathering had at one point a big spike in the power of its monster cards, so now monster cards are actually worth playing now. For the longest time, decks would run like 1 monster card and just use spells and stuff to get around everything else, but now you actually see decks that focus on having cool monsters and stuff that you can use. Another way to avoid power creep, because you still need to sell the new cards, is to use what Extra Credits calls incomparables. They have a whole video about incomparables, and what it does is, rather than just having a raw upping of power, like going from, you know, Lesser Dragon to Legion to Gemini Elf to Gene Warped Werewolf, although by the time Gene Warped Werewolf came out, it was kind of irrelevant, is to instead give new tactics and techniques that players can use to get an edge and set up their win condition. So that's a way that you can bring interest to a game without necessarily messing with the power curve. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's take a look inside the starter deck. So, something you should know about this starter deck, and it's something I've brought out before, is that the contents of this starter deck are random. You get one of these 4 starter decks in order to, inside this box, and I've already talked about how I cannot stand this idea. What this is it's an effort to lift the cap on the number of starter decks you can sell to a player, and honestly, that strikes me as kind of gross. I mean, booster packs already do that enough. That's kind of what booster packs are for. And trying to do it with starter decks it's just a mess. Card games should be accessible. You should make it so that people know what they're getting inside of these boxes. So if somebody buys a starter deck, they get exactly what they're going for. Especially if the starter decks are, like, not full play sets of cards, or even if they are, because it means that somebody runs the risk of buying just a second copy of a starter deck that they don't want. This applies as well to starter decks that include, like, premium cards in random decks here and there. Like, that's what this Chloe card is. This Chloe card is a special card that appeared in, I think, like, only a few of the Luck and Logic starter decks for Chloe actually included this Chloe signature card in there. I know it's hard to see, but there's like a gold foil like signature on there. And it's another thing that I don't like about Bushiroad. It's gross. Don't do that. Here I am trying to push, you know, things like ethical product design, and everybody's out here making these stupid things. And it doesn't help that I, like, don't recognize half of these teams. Like, I know Oo-Rah-Meh-Shi and I kind of know Togaro, but I'm not familiar with these two down here. So the fact that I might randomly get characters who I'm not a fan of or who I am just not familiar with is a bit of a peril. This happened with Bleach as well. I know Bleach included, like, a random starting character in their starter decks, which thankfully you could still get those characters other ways, so it wasn't entirely a loss. But the era of random starter decks where you just don't know what you're getting in the starter box is kind of done and over with. We're at a point these days where games actually include the lists of the cards that are in the deck on the back of the box. That's kind of the industry standard these days. There's no more half decks, no more semi decks, unless it's like specifically for a drafting event where everybody's supposed to go in blind and not know what they're getting, like the pre-release kits that Pokemon puts out. Those are better because they're supposed to be random and they're offset by the packs that you get, and you're not really spending much on those individual pieces. But anyway, I know these things are apparently worth a pretty tidy sum, but like I said, cards are meant to be played with YOLO. So let's see who we get in here. It would be nice if I got the Oo-Rah-Meh-Shi set, because those are the characters I'm most familiar with, but watch me just get one of those two groups that I don't know. 110% isn't enough. Is that their power creep slogan? Or is that's the Togaro sign there? Am I gonna get Togaro in here? Let's see. We have a pair of spirit trackers. Like I said, there are cards that require you to spend your spirit energy in order to play. You get 2 each turn. You get to stock up to 10. So I assume there's like some finisher cards that cost like 4 or 5 or something. And it's Togaro. Okay, so I do at least know kind of who Togaro is. He is Big Muscle Man, who is big antagonist against Yusuke. Okay, so at least I got some characters I'm familiar with. So we have younger Togaro. Defense 4,000, attack 3,000. Surprising strength, this character's attacks gain plus 1,000 until the match ends. So he just, I guess, gets stronger every single turn. And Karasu, powerful reserves. Shuffle all of your items from your discard pile into your deck. And instant grenades, attack power 6,000. So against Hiei with his defense of 3,000, that'll be an instant 2 damage. And then we have We have our beater here, defense 5,000, attack 7,000. Elder Togaro, sinister scheme and body manipulation. So we got 4 characters here, although I think you need 5 in order to build a full deck. And then we have Koenma's opening. Discard a card from your hand to discard all cards in each player's hand. Although, And then No Mercy. If you have the Togaro team bonus, your attacks get plus 4,000 for this turn. And these are cards that cost spirit energy to use. So, yeah, you get a full team of all 4 Togaro. I don't know if there's any in the deck, but we will see pretty quickly. Although, since I have Hiei, I could build a full team of 5, though I can't exactly use this. So we have, oh yeah, another thing they had was they had organized play right out of the gate. I'm working on the organized play video. Trust me, believe me. It says exclusive cards in the tournament prize packs, and yet I have younger Togaro right here. Then we have our, I assume, our playmat. Yep. Oh, it's a 2-player playmat. Look at that. So is it another one? Oh, it's a checklist on the back. Okay. So it's a 2-player playmat where what happens is characters fight in the arena, but then you have your lineup here for the remaining ones. So what happens is if you once you win, you just flip the character over and you can just keep going until one player wins 3 matches. So let's take a look at the deck here. Ally fight for Aikichi. Oh, there we go. So we have a typeless character, Goku Monkey. Goku Monkey. So do we have any other characters? We got, there's a familiar card. The Zombies on the Hunt. So this is something from the earlier scenes where we have like actual ghosts and stuff, but for the most part it's, you know, stuff like this. It's just, you know, the tournament fight. So this looks like a pretty basic deck. So is it just the team that is random, or is the deck random as well? Because this looks a bit more like a Oo-Rah-Meh-Shi deck with all of the Oo-Rah-Meh-Shi cards I'm seeing in there. Straightforward decks. A rando appears. This is you know, every Twitter user's worst nightmare is a rando appears in the comments. Okay, so let's take a closer look at some of these cards. Something I didn't point out, but which I assume is meant to be implied, is there is a blue dot here for hero cards and a red dot here for villain cards. I say that because in this starter deck there was an attack card that checked for heroic or villainous characters. Shibato Shining Sword, which checks for heroes and villains. Honestly, if you ask me, the fact that these things are not labeled is a problem in comprehension. Like this card here doesn't say that it is a technique card on it. You have to count on the fact that there's a fist there. You have to count on somebody not being colorblind or in bad lighting conditions to understand that this is a technique as opposed to an item or an event. Honestly, you want to put the name of your card type on your card. It's literally what every other game does. So missing that labeling is a problem. The larger problem, I think, though, is the aforementioned team bonus, where if you have a group of characters that all have the same thing, you get a team bonus. However, those are not listed anywhere on the card. For example, I have 4 Togaro cards in this setup here, but the actual team bonus for Togaro is not actually listed anywhere, and that can be confusing for gameplay. You'd think that they would have included a special token in this little packet of Togaro cards that lists the Togaro team bonus, but they did not do that. That's something that would be standard issue in today's game, where if you have something where certain characters being together trigger some kind of rule, that there would be a rule reminder card included in that setup. So the fact that you have to go and look up a list of things, it feels almost like a decipher game with all the stuff you have to look up on the side. Anyway, there are some other cards that bring question as to the game's balance. For an example of probably the most common sort of mistake we see in card games, especially of this era, is the case of cards that are just straight up better versions of other cards, where you see we have the card, we have Combat Knives, which I showed you before, and we also have Botan's Ore, which are both items that do the same thing. They are an item that costs nothing to equip and gives plus 1,000 to their wielder. Heck, Botan in this sense is basically like Charon from Greek mythology. It's the ferryman. The ferryman to the other side is what Botan is. So we're talking like an oar that's been dipped in the river Styx, and some knives made especially for fighting in combat. But do you know what outpowers both of them? A fishing pole. Yes, a fishing pole is another item that is free, except it gives plus 2,000 power instead of plus 1,000. So what we have here is a case of a card that is in every way better than both Botan's Orb and combat knives, because they can all be for the purposes of card effects, they are the same card cost-wise, but fishing pole is literally 1,000 points stronger. It's literally twice as good, is what I'm saying. These cards are what most people would refer to as pack chaff. They're cards to exist to allow stuffing in the booster packs to make people think they're getting a better value. Something I talked about in my Rarity Iceberg video is there should be good cards at every rarity. You don't want to take junk and just throw it in here like this. Probably a better example of a card that I think is balanced against fishing pole is the card Really Big Axe. Now, Really Big Axe, it's just like from before. It has no cost. It does plus 1,000 power. However, if it is equipped to the character Bowie, who I actually have right here, if it's actually attached to Bowie, then it becomes a plus 3,000 power card. And this, I think, is a fair example of this kind of card. You have fishing pole, which is consistent. It's consistently pretty good. So it's a card that has a good chance of being included in a deck because of its consistency, versus Really Big Axe, which, when the situation arises, is normally a worse card than fishing pole, but can, in the right circumstances, be a better card than fishing pole. This, I think, is a much more fair balance, because it's a situation that you can create to make an item that is better and more cost-effective than fishing pole. However, this also opens up some counterplay, because your opponent can do things to try to disrupt that setup. Now, I don't think Really Big Axe is as good as it seems here, because Bowie is only one of the 5 characters I'm allowed to use. I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to stack a deck of nothing but Bowie. I believe all of the characters have to be different, so that really puts a damper on Really Big Axe being as useful or as powerful as fishing pole. But yeah, just don't do this. Don't just make cards that are straight up better than other cards. I mean, if there was some kind of circumstance where there's like a card effect that says if Botan's Ore is in play, then yada yada yada, then you have something like Mystical Shine Ball, which is a card that's not too great on its own, but because of the cards that go along with it, now you have something good. Mystical Shine Ball is a Yu-Gi-Oh card. It's like a 1-star, really weak little monster, but because it's a normal monster, and there's a card that you just have to get it into play, and you can pull like a bunch of Mystical Shine Balls out of your deck for just a really low cost, just some life points, but you get to do it all for free, and can use that to go into Synchros and Xyz and Link monsters, just basically for free, is what makes it a really good card. It's all the stuff revolving around Mystical Shine Ball that makes it good, as opposed to Mystical Shine Ball itself. Honestly, I thought Fishing Pole would have been more like Shadow Sword. Shadow Sword is another one that gives plus 1,000 power, but it actually gets an additional ability that can mill the top card of an opponent's deck when damage is inflicted. Now, this one actually costs a point of spirit energy to go into, which is what these little cardboard trackers here measure. These are, I'm reminded of other games that have a life point counter where you actually slide a tracker along. This, hey, Digimon players, this is what you should be clamoring for. One that has a hole in the middle so that you can see the number through it. This is, I'm going to be using this for Digimon if I manage to get some Digimon play off the ground. I'm going to use this as my tracker, so there you go out there. Now all you Digimon people know what to bother Bandai about next. It should be one of these punch-out tokens with a hole in the middle so you can see the number through it. This is good product design here. It's probably the only good product design here, but it costs spirit energy to play. I honestly thought Fishing Pole would cost some spirit energy to put into play because it's just straight up stronger than so many of them. Another thing I can't say I really like about the system is the fact that you have to discard cards in order to attack. Now, in the case of Axe Blade Fist, you don't have to discard anything, although because it's so weak at mere power 2,000, it clearly needs to be comboed with cards like Really Big Axe, like Fishing Pole, to pump its attack power up to the point where it's actually dealing damage, essentially for free. On the opposite end, we have cards like Power Slam, which cost 3. You have to discard 3 cards from your hand to do this. And remember, I talked about this a bit in the life decking video, but people hate having to fritter away the cards in their hand. They'd rather play those cards. Unless there's, like, cards that benefit from being discarded, then that's not a terribly good, a good ability. I mean, sure, you draw 2 cards at the start of your turn, but that's really the only draw power I'm seeing here, other than the card Kitty Love, which costs 4 Spirit Energy to play to do, I don't know, it's a mystery. It's Pot of Greed. It's yet another card that's like Pot of Greed. We also have cards like Shards of Winter, which is a basic 4,000 attack, but then the clearly superior Armor of the Ape, which does the same damage for the same cost, but also gives a permanent 1,000 to defense. Granted, you can only use this technique once per match. That's once per character. So you could pack several more copies of this and either just attach a new copy to your current character to do it again and get its effect, or save it for another character. We also have Armor of the Hyena, which is basically a free version of that, which can be used repeatedly and it's just slightly weaker. We have a more interesting one where you have to discard 2 cards from your hand, but you can wreck a technique your opponent has. This, I think, is a better one. We also have a card that forces a random discard, although, like I said, in a game where you draw 2, that's not as useful. These, a lot of cards that force an opponent to discard a card are frequently used less to force that discard and more often to take a look at an opponent's hand to gain that advantage. This is where you get things like Thought Seize or Duress, those cards that allow you to take a look at what your opponent is carrying and force some cards out of their hand. So Psychic Spyglass, which is a card that forces your opponent to always play with their hand exposed, is actually ludicrously overpowered. Even though a player's hand can shift from turn to turn, the fact that you always know what your opponent is about to do is an incredibly powerful ability. Otherwise, we have some cards that are really bad, like Improvised Weapon, which gives plus 4,000 power, but you have to discard an item. But considering that most items either give a ludicrously good effect like Psychic Spyglass, or give some kind of power bonus, that means you're probably operating at a net loss based on the card you're discarding, considering there's a card that does not force this effect that is only 1,000 power less. Although these event cards that give temporary once per turn boosts don't seem like they'd be as useful as the item cards that stay in play. Unless, like, again, there's like card interactions where a card benefits from being discarded by a card effect. But honestly, maybe it's just because I'm looking at the first set. This game feels a bit like a mess to me. Although I heard it became even more of a mess when more sets came out. I don't know if I'll be able to take a look at those, but I do like how we have the special trackers that have the hole in the middle that let you see the number. This is something that, I don't know if we'll see these start to pop up on Etsy for Digimon or what have you, but yeah, there's certainly an interesting item. But yeah, that's a look at Yu Hakusho. Honestly, I think it's a bit narrow-minded. The fact that you literally have to set up a best-of-3 tournament and can only use 1 character, and thus you don't get to have like interesting interactions between those characters, and you can't have different strategies aside from the one, I honestly think that takes away from the enjoyment that the game might otherwise offer. But yeah, that's Yu Hakusho. Apparently it was big for a while, although I think that's because that's from a time period where we had more card games than sets, so definitely, you don't see card games like this anymore, partially because, if I recall correctly, Score went out of business because they just made a bunch of games and then then just kind of collapsed. And like I said, the designer of this game allegedly caught cheating at a high-profile event. But yeah, this was fun. This was a nice, spooky game to do towards the end of October. And yeah, that's Yu Hakusho, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off. Join us next time on Cards from the Abyss.